Hi, this is Denise.
Hey, this is Maggie.
Welcome to our podcast, Candor and Courage at Work.
Denise and I have known each other for a long time, a couple of decades, HR pros, and we thought it might be helpful if we got together and shared some of the things that we've learned along the way.
That's right, Maggie. Many struggle with being candid and being courageous, and we just want to use what we've learned to help you use those traits in your daily work life.
Here's hoping that makes you more successful. And here we go.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Denise.
We're back.
We are.
We just came off of 2 episodes of Underperformers. A lot of feedback.
We did get a lot of feedback, as we expected. And it's part of the reason that we realized as we finished the first episode, which ran a little long,
Right.
that we needed to record the second episode, which ran a little long.
Sorry, not sorry.
So, right. But we wanted to get those stories in there because we've learned from our listeners that sometimes the stories that we share are the most impactful parts of the episodes. Yeah. So I know when we closed out last time, you put a call to action out for folks that had questions.
Yes. And we have a couple.
We've got a couple we're going to cover today. We got more than
Right.
a couple, but we picked a couple out of the mailbag.
Yeah, we got a couple. And but I think these 2 probably best summarize the feedback that we've gotten on the episode.
Agreed.
So again, thank you to everybody that submitted questions. So one of the questions that I think that we should talk about today is, what if I'm afraid the employee will quit? Now, this is the underperformer.
Right.
What if I'm afraid that the underperformer will quit and I cannot afford to lose them?
Yeah, that's an entirely understandable question for a leader. And probably the one that's most often unspoken that prevents them from addressing the underperformer in the first place. They're like, look, I'm not going to be able to backfill it, or everybody else is going to have to pick up the load, or you name it.
I'm going to have to put more on my plate.
Or, yes, I'm going to have to pick up the load myself.
So how bad are they?
All right. Yeah. But the reality is, and it echoes what I shared in the last episode, that story where the leader did not address it.
Correct.
And what that resulted in were that the best performers left.
That is correct. The question I feel that we as leaders need to ask ourselves is, what if I do nothing and my good performers leave?
That's the legitimate question.
And the reality is, my good performers are the ones doing that. That's a gap that I would not want to fill with my underperformer trying to help me out. So you really don't have a choice. You really have to find that courage and say to yourself, I need to take action here before my team further declines.
Yep.
And I feel almost like, I believe we, talked about this perhaps in the first episode even of underperformers, is what if my boss sees the decline and now I'm at risk, my brand, but maybe my employment is at risk because I'm not choosing to address underperformance.
Right. Which is also a very subtle fear that the leader may or may not realize they're experiencing. So if they go down this path for too long without addressing it, they're like, I know I've got a problem, I'm not addressing it. Gosh, my boss is going to notice that. That then could become a problem for me because it negatively impacts my brand and ultimately could cost me my job if I am viewed by my manager as not addressing problems when I should. So we know the key is to address those problems early.
Correct. When they're small and easier to fix.
Yep. That keeps them from becoming such high stakes because your best performers are the ones that are most likely to be able to leave.
I also think too, really quickly, that when the other team sees me addressing things, that trust in me is increasing.
Absolutely.
That they know that, okay, she's going to handle this. We're not going to have to suffer with this anchor holding us back. And I hate to talk about a human as an anchor, but sometimes they are.
Yeah, well, and that's the nature of underperformers. And the reality of the work environment is everybody sees what's going on. They see the underperformer. They know that that's impacting the entire team. And just as importantly or more importantly, they see you as the leader and what you are doing about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think too, I think it's not just production. It's not just quantity of work produced. It's morale.
Yes.
And the whole quiet quitting thing is when people feel like there's no value to performing at my highest and best. So why am I doing this? Now production's going to go even further down.
That increases everyone's stress.
Yes.
Yeah, because your really great performers are not going to want to lower their standards.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump right into the second question.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is, what if I'm the reason? What if I'm the problem and the reason that this person is underperforming? What did you think?
Well, I think that that's really a tough conclusion to reach. But if you're asking that question, it's probably indicative on some level of recognizing that because the issues haven't been addressed early or early enough, or when you first spotted them, that you are the problem.
That is correct.
That you are not fulfilling your responsibilities as a leader. And so really need to just engage in that serious self-assessment. I know when we were reading all the questions that we got and selected this one amongst the two that we're covering today, one of the things we laughed about, but we're serious, is if you're just jumping in as a new listener, or maybe even if you've been listening for a while and you need a refresh, go back and catch episodes 2, 3, 4, 5. That foundational work that we laid around what do we mean by candor? What does that look like? How does that show up? And what is courage? And what are the 9 kinds of fear that may come into play that impact our ability and willingness to be courageous? So that foundationally, and if you're a longtime listener, you know what we're talking about are skills that you can develop. And that's what we really encourage folks to do.
So for me, this question, I took away with it, I got good news for you. Okay, if you're asking that question, number one, you should ask that question. We should always look in the mirror and say, what did I do to contribute to this person's underperformance?
Good point.
And hopefully you look at it earlier on where you're looking at how you could have helped them or how you can help them still to avoid further decline. But the good news is that you are introspective on where you could be the most helpful. I had a really great conversation with somebody recently about an underperformer, and the conclusion was that we don't think we've done everything we can do to make this person successful. So we need to keep trying before we give up on them.
Yep.
However, it's getting to a point where it's about to happen. So let's do this one thing so we can say to ourselves, we did everything we could.
Yeah.
The second thing is, the good news is that you control you.
That's right.
And you have the ability to grab a hold of this and say, let me fix what I have that's contributing to it so that we can move forward from this in a way that's going to be the most effective for the whole team, for the underperformer, and for me as their leader.
Yes. And that rising tide lifts all boats. I mean, so then the whole team benefits from that. And that may involve role playing with someone that you trust. It certainly involves all the steps that we've talked about around planning your conversation. And even if that role playing is you having that conversation in the mirror to develop your own confidence and courage in addressing it.
And to find somebody in your world who is a trusted advisor that understands, that you're like-minded, but you can go to that person and say, from your perspective, where do you think I am contributing to the problem? And that might also be another great answer to address the issue.
Good point.
So more talk in this episode about rehearsing your conversation.
Yeah.
This time, though, as it relates to the good old passive-aggressive employees or boss or peer. I mean, just passive-aggressive types.
Yeah, it shows up a little bit everywhere. And really, we're going to talk about what passive-aggressive behavior looks like and how to address it and so forth. But at the core, I think what we really want to emphasize is how healthy being appropriately assertive is. But we have a caution.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talked about the phrase appropriately assertive, we shared the observation that in some circles, assertiveness is often confused with aggression.
I think it gets a bad rap because I think people misspeak or use the term aggression when they really do mean assertive. And they're so closely, spelled that it almost seems to intertwine and get mixed up in people's minds. The caution is for assertive, we want folks to not see it as a negative.
Right.
Continue to have the mindset that being clear and direct is a form of being assertive, but really look at it as an effective way of communicating with folks.
Yeah. So it's really striking that balance. We want it to be constructive and respectful.
Yes. Always respectful.
And, that means that it is, yes, going to be clear. It's going to be specific, neutral in tone, just that professionalism, essentially our adult to adult kinds of conversations.
Well, there are some adults that don't speak respectfully, but again, I go back to our whole definition of candid feedback, where we want to be clear, we don't want any vagueness, we want to be direct so that folks don't shy away from speaking clearly and directly and get into that, well, I'm not going to address that, more of the passive side of things.
Right.
And so
even in talking about this, that continuum passive aggressive behavior, I think that you characterized it as the wolf in sheep's clothing, or, yes. Passive aggressive means that you're using indirect communication or even sarcasm. And in the workplace, it shows up any number of ways. It might be that somebody, says, sure, whatever you want, but then drags their feet. That is a form of passive aggressive behavior. The teammate who agrees in the meeting, but then undermines the decision afterward, which is one of my pet peeves.
Yeah.
Just saying. And then I didn't know that was my responsibility.
Yes.
When clearly they did. And so those are just some examples of way that passive aggressive behavior shows up.
I didn't understand that's what you meant. It's like, come on. We were, as we were preparing for today's episode, we looked at what is passive versus what is assertive versus what is aggressive. And I looked at the traits of being passive, and I think of folks in my world that are very well-intentioned, and they're pure hearts, and they just lack confidence. But to me, passive aggressive, it's really just aggressive. And they're using a softer tone or a meeker tone that a passive person, a pure heart passive person might use. But it's used for, I would say, ill intent.
Yeah.
That it's like, well, I'm going to be sweet about it, but I'm really being aggressive, which is not respectful. So.
Right. And so when we were talking about it, one of the great examples that if you're watching television
yes.
these days, you know right where we're going, because there's a great commercial that highlights exactly what passive aggressive behavior looks like.
Yeah.
And it's a Joe's Family Reunion, or
Joe's Family Reunion for Progressive Insurance. And I think they call the bit, because there was a Nancy that was passive progressive rather than passive aggressive.
Yes.
And now Joe's Family Reunion is a continuing of the passive progressive. But it cracked me up.
Yeah.
Because I can see in my world people that behave that way. And I love, of course, the humorous spin on it,
Yes. Yeah.
And then, of course, at the end, when I don't remember the relative's name, when she claps back with passive aggressive comments to him.
Right.
And, and those are the things that I really want to do in my real life. I want to be able to say the things that are in my head, but are better left in my head and not actually vocalized.
Not uttered. Yeah.
But that is, I think, a really good example of how people, real life examples in some case of how people are passive aggressive.
Yeah, and it's relatable. That's a family setting, and of course, we focus on the workplace. But those same kinds of comments or behaviors are the kinds of things that we can see in our workplace. And so, part of what we recognize in that, it's really conflict avoidance mixed with resentment. The behavior's indirect, but the impact is definitely direct.
See, I don't see it as conflict avoidant.
Okay.
I think it is the wolf in sheep's clothing. They want to engage in a conflict, but rather than it be pure aggression, they want to use that nice, I'm doing the air quote here, that nice way of saying it, but it reads purely as passive aggressive.
Okay.
I really feel it with the indirect way of addressing things and whatever they got going on. We could do a whole show on the psychology of passive aggressiveness, where it stems from. But whatever they got going on, it is not helpful. It is not intended. I don't think it's intended to be helpful. I think it's intended to hurt and to shut you down or whatever that negative outcome that they're seeking. And so we just have to deal with it, and we have strategies on how to deal with it that we'll talk about right now.
Yeah. I think that's we can assume what their intent is, and that is to be aggressive and to bring that conflict. But I'm always reminded that we judge others based on their actions, and we judge ourselves based on our intent. Okay. So when we look at intent versus impact, it's clearly it's got the negative impact, and that's what we've got to address. They may not know better. They may have been raised that this is how I get attention. Or I give somebody the silent treatment, or I don't make eye contact. I can remember very early in my career, when there was a significant conflict going on in the workplace, we had outside counsel that said, look, if you want to have the biggest impact on those troublemakers, don't acknowledge them. Don't make eye contact.
Oh, okay.
Ostracizing them. And so I think in that case, the intent and impact aligned, right? Because it was very clear to them that that was the intent. That was so opposite of the behavior that I typically engage in that it was very, very difficult. But regardless of what their intent is, they're engaging in aggressive behavior that's clothed as passive comments.
And again, if we go back to our ultimate perspective of being an effective leader, our role is to grow and develop. And so if this feedback that they're giving, and again, it doesn't matter if it's a peer, if it's somebody on your team, if it's your boss,
It could be.
it could be. But if it's not being helpful, if it's not designed to have me grow and develop, then we have to do something. Now, I'm going to tell you, when you shared that about just ignoring, ostracizing, I think that can work in the short term. I think that can work depending on the situation, but I would not suggest it as a long-term strategy.
No, it just struck me as so foreign.
Yeah.
And that's why it's memorable.
Right. But perhaps, like, if you're in a situation, I just don't want to deal with that right now, so I'm not going to deal with it. And that would make perfect sense.
That's totally picking your battles.
Yep.
So, and that's item number one on dealing with passive aggressive people. Are you going to respond to that? Are you going to acknowledge and address that in some way? Or is there another point in time or another behavior that's going to make more sense for you to address?
Yeah, I think, and we talked about another, I think it's step 2 for this is setting boundaries. I think you have to decide what the line is that you're not willing to allow them to cross. And so, if they haven't crossed the line, it's tedious and tiresome. But yeah, if you addressed every time somebody was passive aggressive with you, I don't think you get anything done.
Agreed.
And in all candor, Maggie and I talking in preparation for this episode, I said to her, I think I'm passive aggressive at times too.
I know I am.
Where, I know I'm dealing with somebody who is not maybe the the kindest person. And so I go into that super sweet mode, kill them with kindness thing. And I'm going, I really want to tell them they're being a jerk,
Right.
that this isn't helpful. But when I choose to say, you know what, I'm not going to engage in that, it's not valuable enough to me. I just need to move past this.
Right.
But then I get to be kind and nice. And then I think, am I being passive aggressive? So, but yeah, I think you got to pick your battles. I think you have to decide what's going to be those behaviors that I'm going to have to address this.
Yeah. And address it from the standpoint of curiosity, not accusation.
Right.
So, hey, I've noticed this pattern going on. I care about you. I want to check in on you and want to make sure things are unfolding the way that you expect them to. Help me understand, right? That conversation, but that is the conversation to plan.
Yes.
And to carry out. So,
but I think you get back to also being clear, giving them examples.
Yes.
We talked about don't diagnose them. Don't say, wow, that was really passive aggressive. You don't want to do that. But you do want to talk about the impact of a specific situation that you've given them and how that person responded to it. Maybe hurt or embarrassed or whatever that was. Maybe it's me, and I can say, you hurt, that was hurtful to me. And I go back again to a prior episode where I said, you can shoot right back with, and I'm sure you didn't mean to do that. I'm sure that was not your intent.
Right.
But that's the way it felt.
Right.
So.
Right. And that is getting at that intent versus impact, and really good to take ownership of the being part of the solution and part of the resolution. Like, how are we as adult to adult going to work through this?
Right. Yeah. I think the key is planning those conversations. But again, we've talked about that from episode to episode, just so that you don't walk yourself into a minefield where you blow up a relationship, with your boss in terms of who decides your annual review or annual merit increase. So, and I'm sure there'll be more conversations to be had around this, because I know that this is going to be another one of those show topics that people are going to have a lot to say.
I think so. So with that, be sure to go to candorencourageatwork.com. There's a link there where you can leave us a recording of any feedback or questions that you may have. And we'll look forward to tackling those in a future episode.
We sure will. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today for Candor and Courage at Work.
We hope you found some inspiration and encouragement in today's episode.
For more information or to connect with us, visit our website, candorandcourageatwork.com. And be sure to download future episodes wherever you listen.